So about a year ago, I was new to the city, and I was running along because I had a really important meeting, and I wanted to, get there on time and show a good face and make some good connections. And I had planned out my transit, which if you've spent more than 5 minutes in the Bay Area, you know that transit's kind of a hard thing to plan around. And so I had my little BART app, and I was scheduled to get there on time. And then, of course, I was heading down the stairs, I heard that fateful sound. The sound of the car pulling away. And next BART, not for another 10 minutes. So that sucks, right? And so essentially my app had failed me. However, because of open data, people had built about 20 other apps, and I just went through and tested until I found the perfect app, and I have never been late for another BART, or overly early, or waiting, or just lost the next BART. And so essentially it's allowed me to really refine, and now I'm like a smug person when I get down to the platform and I'm waiting, and I watch the people who are like, had been there for 10 minutes, and I just stroll in and stroll onto the BART. It's amazing, I love it. And so open data has done that, and that's really cool, and I think that's a very visible and a way that touches your everyday lives. However, open data needs to go beyond simply apps, and we're going to sort of talk about that and how that's happening in San Francisco. So just a little bit of history. San Francisco got started on open data, which is essentially releasing machine-readable data on the web back in 2009, and this was essentially the trumpet call, thou shalt publish data, but it wasn't really clear how to go about it, how to prioritize. And subsequently went through this like publishing scramble where it's like open data, open data, open data, and people are sort of throwing stuff out there, but nobody was paying attention to documentation, how to maintain it, how to keep it up to date, all these sorts of things. And then we moved into what I call the period of stagnation, where essentially our publishing rate flattened and we weren't really updating data and that sort of thing. And so right now we're in the middle of what I call the resource reckoning, which is I came on board, we're doing a few different other things in the city. But what I came on, and I think the key question that we're confronting with open data is if we have a very narrow focus on just apps, we're not going to really bake open data into how governments really run and use their own data and the degree to which they care about publishing it. So the key question for me was how to broaden the value of open data. And my central hypothesis was that DataSF can actually help solve our internal data challenges. DataSF is our open data portal where we publish all of our data. And so with this question of how to broaden the value of open data, I sort of sat about systematically when I was at the city trying to find, feel, and fix the pain. And there's a lot of pain around data within every government out there, trust me, or any large organization for example. So after doing a lot of talking and a lot of investigating and a lot of my own data collection, the three core challenges came down to knowledge, access, and ability. And let's just start with knowledge. So knowledge of what? Of what data sets we even hold. So governments are really complex. Think of them as like a multi-global corporation that does everything from paving streets, filling potholes, to running hospitals, to providing care for homelessness, to oh my gosh, there's so much. They're running transit, all sorts of things. So there's a huge range of stuff. And so there's lots of departments doing lots of different things, and they don't really know or understand what other data is available across the enterprise, if you will. And our open data called for a catalog of departments' data. So this is the first step in the challenge we're trying to solve, which is to catalog the city's data. And this is everything from spreadsheets, which lots of stuff is managed on spreadsheets, to like complex data cubes through, our Public Utilities Commission, and they're like rad and crazy with streamlining data off of real-time devices, right? So we literally have like a huge, tremendous range of data in the city with ranging levels of sophistication. So how to go about it? Well, we broke it down into a set of 3 steps. Start with data sources, brainstorm, and then articulate them. And we provided a lot of support in doing this in deadlines. Deadlines are awesome in government because then you can hold people accountable for it. And so we've managed to do this, and now you can actually go and discover what data the city actually holds, which no one's had a list of data sets in the city and county of San Francisco until recently. And by the way, this is only 69% of the department's reporting, and we hope to get more listed up there now. So this sort of helps with the knowledge problem. What data do we actually contain? Like if I'm, Joy in the controller's office and I need to investigate homelessness programs, what data do we actually collect about homelessness programs? So hopefully the data set inventory can start to let us have greater visibility around what data we actually have in the city. And as far as I know, there's very few government entities in the world that have done this to date. And of course, when it's available on our open data portal, now we can use our APIs and things like that to access and do interesting and fun stuff. And of course, what's cool about this is we're forced to eat our own dog food. By actually using the open data portal that was nominally just for like outside developers to use and do cool stuff with, we can actually be eating our own dog food and building off new applications on it. So now let's get on to access. So, well, you saw a little bit of a teaser of what that was, which was the open data portal, is can we take these open data portals that have been focused on external audiences and actually use them for internal use? So here it is. And why this is important is in the city, so going back to finding, feeling, and fixing the pain, when you actually go to obtain, if you realize that another department has data, then if you want to actually access the data, this is usually the typical process that you go through. Well, you start with, hey, do you have this data? Hopefully now they'll know because of the data set inventory. And the person will respond, maybe. And then they'll say, can I have it? And then they'll say, hello, get back to me. And then eventually maybe you actually get data from another department, usually sent through email. And then someone gets it, and they start to look at it, starting to analyze it, and then they start to have some questions about the data, and then they enter into the question death spiral. And I've actually experienced this. This is what it's like to get data. There's a lot of emails, a lot of back and forth, and very few things actually written down and obtained. And of course, when it's time to update the data, to refresh your analysis, refresh your report, do anything like this, see previous, right? Just all over again. So if we can use tools like publication automation, we're actually tapping in and then extracting it and then making it available on DataSF, then we can sort of get through this access barrier, which is probably sounds boring, but it's actually really hard and challenging, and it's an ongoing challenge throughout the city. And so we're doing that, and so that can help us with data that is open, data that can be broadly shared, but what are we supposed to do about data that's actually private? So I mentioned we have a hospital. We collect a lot of private information about people, whether it's healthcare data or other data that's regulated. How are we supposed to deal with that and really figuring out how to make that data liquid so that it can be used all across the city? And that's where we get into our balancing act between privacy and transparency. So just for a little bit of context, this is the US. And in the US, we have many, many laws around privacy and information security. We have HIPAA, which covers healthcare. We have FERPA, which covers, education, all education stuff. If you're a student here, it covers your data. We have 42 CFR 2. Don't ask me about it, it's the worst one. It's very hard to follow. There's many, many of them out there. And then, of course, because we're California, we add on all of our own interpretations of essentially the same areas, and then we just push it all on there as well. And then, of course, San Francisco is also sort of, let's call it civically active, and we have our own sort of range of laws around how we should and shouldn't be protecting private information. Of course, all these laws sort of like run into each other and like get confused and do things, and no one defines anything the same way because that wouldn't be fun. And I mean, it's worth understanding the history is when we think about privacy of of personal information, it's something that's worked and it's happened in distinct verticals like healthcare, education, financial services. And so instead of having a general approach to privacy in our country at the federal, state, and local level, we've had a vertical approach, like an issue-specific kind of approach. So this is a nightmare to navigate, especially because a lot of times it even affects internal data sharing. Like each department in the city was birthed at a different time and falls under a different regulatory regime. But the thing is, most of the stuff that we're working on doesn't fall neatly within nice little tiny regulatory regimes, right? So how do we sort of get around this? So the way we're approaching it is we leverage the data inventory to essentially do a raw classification of our data, where we're classifying into public, protected, and sensitive. And we actually flag that on our data set inventory. And then, of course, we're actually trying to inventory and understand all the applicable laws in a shared single place. And then what we're doing is we're introducing lots of process and control points around publishing our data sets. Like, oh, if you go here, you have to talk to this lawyer at this point, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, that leads us to our balance of what we're trying to do is to release data quickly, but also have a thorough responsive, so we're doing it, thorough process, so we're doing it responsibly. And that's another sort of key trade-off governments are facing in terms of managing and publishing data. And then, of course, what we're implementing on the technical side of things is like clearly defined methods for obfuscating and anonymizing and aggregating data, and then consistent technical implementations to ensure that we're actually following those methods appropriately. But it leaves me with a holiday wish list, and you guys work with like much bigger, much more complex data, but I have to work within, in a lot of ways, simpler data and smaller data, but it's heavily regulated, which makes the management of it complex. So I want plug and play regardless of backend, and I don't want to spend 18 hours configuring each ETL. I want effortless probabilistic matching with expert curation, where it's like, oh, those probably match because, you know, all the departments define things differently, right? Of course. And then role-based access control down to the column, like, because that's how granular it gets in these regulatory frameworks that we're dealing with. And then, of course, I want it to be legally aware. I still don't know what that means, I just want it. And of course, it must be cheap. I like cheap. We spend way too much on IT and government, so cheap's great. But then I still worry about this. So, like, what is this? This is a pointillism, right? 2 points to ever guess what it is. Right? This is what we're worried about. It's the Mosaic effect. So in open data, we're supposed to be publishing the government's data and get it out there. As we get more and more out, even as we impose those sort of standard methods and the consistent technical implementation, when you get enough of it, as you all know, you can start to figure out lots of things without so much data. And so I don't know how to solve this. No one's telling me how to solve this, but I am worried about it, all right? So knowledge access, so if you know you have the data, you actually have access to it, private or otherwise, what? Who cares? What can you actually do with the data? And this is where it comes down to ability. And so we're doing a couple different things in this space. So we're assuming, let's assume, an ecosystem of shared data and technology. So we have our platforms that are dealing with our open data. We have our platforms that are dealing with our private data. Even despite all the never-ending list of back-end systems, of which we have well over 1,000, it's still being brought together in this beautiful, magical space. And so what we want to do is we want to increase individual skills and capacity to use the data effectively. And then at the department level, we really want to work with them to help them leverage their data and support analytics programs in their departments. And we can talk more about analytics if you want. I'm very much more interested, instead of doing like a bunch of regressions, which are hard to do well, hard to interpret, and hard to operationalize, I'm much more interested in introducing a lot of random, quick, small experiments in city efforts. And then lastly, we're working to foster what I call a data-enabled policy environment. So there's no such thing as perfectly data-driven decision-making. If someone wants to philosophically challenge me on that, I dare you to, but at some level, there's values, there's differences in values, and whether or not what the data says, you won't have a perfectly data-driven world. There's actually a great story about a neuroscientist story where a guy had a part of his brain that got damaged and essentially turned him into Spock, right? Whereas like he was a perfect logical machine. And then he couldn't make simple decisions like which pen color should I use? Should I use the blue pen or should I use the black pen? Why? Because at some level you just have to be like, I'm feeling blue today, right? And if you don't feel blue today, then you can't actually make a decision. So there's no such thing as perfect data in decision-making, but how can we foster increased use of data in decision-making, in particular within the public sphere? So if we get all this done, increase use of data in decision-making. So the first thing we're doing, or one of the things we're doing to target sort of the individual level is we have something that we launched last fall called the Data Academy, where we're really trying to educate people in city government on the whole life cycle of data. from collecting the data, structuring it, data validation, data management, to distribution, publishing, visualizing, analyzing, and across the entire life cycle of it. And the response has been amazing. And I think because, one, we focused on making it schedule friendly, it fits nicely within people's days. Training is really one of the things that doesn't happen a lot in government around lots of things, much less data. It's demand-driven. It's based on what we're getting from actual data that people are reporting they want to learn from us. And then most importantly, it's free. In governments, you have this interesting phenomenon where you actually, are you a lot of academia folks? Yeah? Okay, so then you understand this. There are wealthy departments, and then there are poor departments. Right? Some departments get the flow, other departments do not get the cash flow, right? And so we have the exact same thing in city government, where we have very well-resourced departments, and then we have somewhat impoverished departments that don't get a lot of training, don't get a lot of access to resources. So free is really important. And so far, it really has been a success because we've actually, the best indicator of a successful program is if people are trying to sneak in and bribe to get into your program. So we literally have people contacting the person who manages the classes and be like, can you get me on the list? And she's like, no, we can't do that. We'll let you know just when everyone else. So Data Academy has really taken off, and we're really going to blow it up some more this year. And actually, that was a picture of a class I teach called Information Design. So now what about this? So I came to the city a year ago, and there's this constant prevailing question, which is, what does the city do about affordable housing? If you live in the Bay Area, you know and understand. If you're outside of the Bay Area, you smirk and laugh. Affordable housing is a huge issue, right? It's an incredibly big, important thing. And when I first came, I came to the city, and I'm like, okay, I know this is a big thing. And so I was like, I tried to answer this, what I thought to be a simple question, which is, what does the city do about affordable housing? And then, of course, I'm a data person, and I wanted to understand the context of it. So where do you go for reliable data about affordable housing? So I started with these two questions, and essentially, the answers are the problem. There's everything from, I don't know, to, well, if you go here, and then you go here, and then you go here, and then you piece that with that, and then da. And then maybe you can answer it, or simply prefer, good luck, Joy. Figure it out. So that was the problem. And so what the solution was, the Housing Data Hub, which was a single place to get an overview of housing in San Francisco, understand all the policies and programs. Turns out the city does quite a bit, but it's hard to piece it together from all the different places that you could piece it together, and then support it with data and viz and context. So this is what it looks like. You can go to it now. You can look at housing overview, policies and programs, or jump right into the data. And so if you go to the housing overview, it gives you some background on housing issues and the census data. If you go to the policy hub, this is part of fostering what we like to call a portfolio approach to policy. There's a lot of programs related to affordable housing. If you can see them in one place and you have all this context, that's great. And then when you dive into the individual programs, you can go ahead and explore the data around each of them. So this is our inclusionary housing program, which inclusionary housing means all new housing must include affordable housing. So that's sort of unpacking all these descriptions. And so now we have a place where we can go and we can learn about these programs. We have the context with them. We have the data visualizations. And we're really starting to take this data that was just sort of flat and sitting out there and leveraging all the knowledge and context that's in city government and packaging it in a way that other people can access it and become part of the conversation. So this goes beyond open data to actually turning open data into information. And you can track our progress. We're in the midst of automating all the data sets right now. And so if you want to check it out, it's housing.datasf.org. And there's this fun little thing. So here's eviction notices. Evictions are hot in San Francisco. It's a perennial issue. And so what we've done is if you can go in there and you might not agree with what we've done. You might not like it. You might want to come up with your own visual. I'm sure you will. You can go ahead and do it, and we link right back to the source data set. And I think this is, which is again on DataSF. This is about creating enduring sources of truth and unbroken data linkages, so that lineages, so people can go find information products and then go back to the data that it actually came from, validate, rehash, redo it, whatever. But it's creating this lovely train of data to the authoritative source. So we talk more about this. I have a blog post on this issue, but to go back to our first point, we have these apps and they're cool, but we really need to broaden the value of open data. And that's where something like the housing portal comes in. So if we can use strategic releases that help democratize how governments disseminate their data to a local audience that may be focused on issues, not just apps. So thank you very much.
Questions for Joy? Paul.
Thanks very much. Greatly enjoyed both the enthusiasm and the content. A lot of conversation was there about the sort of how to get data out, how to make it available. In your experience, how do app developers like to view it? So when you're building an app to do the BART scheduling system, how do they like viewing their data? RSS feeds, Google spreadsheet docs, sort of what's the format they prefer?
Yeah, so in my experience dealing with a lot of developers, and I bet Deep can talk more about this, is they like APIs, so we offer them an API, but then a lot of them we find are just like grabbing our CSV versions, and because they don't want to like deal with the API or it's not volatile enough. So what we try to do is simply make it available in all forms, right? And Socrata, our vendor for our open data portal, allows us a great deal of flexibility to do that. And then with visualizations and those more context-heavy deployments of open data, that helps people who are less expert. Open data, to some extent, has sort of been like feeding the technical people really well, I would say, but less so people who don't have ready access to those tools.
Other questions? Yeah.
So has this process driven change in the IT sort of back end?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there's about 50,000 strategies, and our entire plan is on the web. But we're also working very closely with our CIO, Miguel, and the Department of Technology, and more broadly, the technology systems and structures that put us in this like very hard to manage place. And so we're working on a shared services layer strategy, and like what are the modern app stacks that will let us have more liquid data, more easy to pull out, as well as migrating people off of either manual or Excel or, God forbid, always happens, Microsoft Access. And no offense to it, it's just that it's not great for like moving stuff around, right? And so we're working on in partnering with that larger strategy to ensure that the data needs and the data liquidity, and I feel like a Gartner person saying that, but like it is like making data very mobile across these systems, including cloud systems and things like that. And not all vendors are as willing to support you in that as they like to say.
One final question? I've got a quick one, I guess, is how important is empowering the citizenship to use this data and consume it and create data products and sort of make data-driven decisions versus empowering the people in the government? Or maybe that'll change over time. Maybe right now the focus is on empowering the people in the government, policymakers, and eventually you hope to get the citizenship. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, I have lots of thoughts about that. I think you need to do all. So I talked a lot about the internal needs with the idea that if I can obtain sufficient internal buy-in, now I've established my data pipelines. And so if I have my data pipelines, then I can meet demand, right? And so one of the very things we're working on right now, and I just had a conversation earlier today, is like how to increase engagement. And there's a few different things we want to do. One, we want to do show and tells with the Housing Hub. But then also we're thinking about partnering with the library to establish data literacy training and courses and things like that, and adult data literacy, if you will, and reaching out to neighborhood groups and things like that. So year one for me was about laying the groundwork and the infrastructure, and now it's like, hey world. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Great question.
All right, thanks a lot. Maybe give one more round of applause while Deepa's setting up.